Key number one is what is called the 80-20 rule. Now, everybody's heard about the 80-20 rule. It's called the Pareto principle. It was developed by an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto in 1895. And what he discovered is over a large enough number of samples that 20% of what you do accounts for 80% of your results. 20% of your customers account for 80% of your sales. 20% of your products account for 80% of your profits. 20% of your transactions require 80% of the time involved. So the 80-20 rule says to Pareto everything, is to always be looking at what you have to do and say, what are the 20% of the things that I do that are most important to my success, both in the short term and in the long term? Look at your whole company. Look at all of your activities. What are the 20% of the things that you do that give you the greatest bang for the buck? Now, the second key to setting priorities is to distinguish between the urgent and the important. Now, this is one of the most important of all concepts. And it simply says this, is that there are 4 different types of things that you do on a daily basis. And you can divide them into 4 quadrants. If you take these 4 quadrants, you find that there are things that are urgent and things that are not urgent. And there are things that are important and things that are not important. Now, the first quadrant is quadrant 1. These are the things that are both urgent and important. Telephones ringing, people coming in, mail, a temporary crisis, problems, interruptions, and so on. Most people spend most of the time working in the area of the urgent and apparently immediately important. The second quadrant are the things that are important but not urgent. The third area are the things that are urgent but not important. For instance, somebody calling you, but it's not a particularly important thing. And the fourth area are the things that are neither urgent nor important. What is it that the average person does and that you have to get free of? Well, they work in quadrant number 1 all the time because these are pressing. When they get caught up with quadrant number 1, they drop to quadrant number 3, and they do what is urgent but not important. If they get caught up with quadrant number 3, they relax and pay themselves off by doing things in quadrant number 4, things that are neither urgent nor important. However, it is in working more in quadrant 2, doing the things that are important to your career and to your life, but which are not particularly urgent, that you can increase your effectiveness dramatically. These are working on your personal and professional skills, spending time with your family, working on long-term reports, upgrading your abilities, and so on. The things that are important but not urgent are the most vital things to your long-term future. So a critical part of setting priorities is to ask yourself, what are the important things that I have to do but which are not urgent? Because remember this, important but not urgent will eventually be very urgent, and sometimes it will be too late. The third key to setting priorities is to ask yourself, what are your personal values? One of the things that we know is you always have to be working at goals that are congruent with your values. So when we talked about goals, we talked about what are your most important goals. With regard to values and priorities, you have to say, what is most important to me? What do I believe in? What do I stand for? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And you'll find that high performance comes when your goals and your values are congruent, and low performance comes when your goals and your values clash with each other, when you're working at something that is inconsistent with what is really important. And this brings us to number 4 key in priorities. What are your unique strengths? Again, when we look at the most effective men and women in our society, we find that every one of them has taken the time to think through what they are particularly good at. What are you particularly good at? What are the strengths and abilities that have led to your success in life to date? What is it that you do easy that comes difficult to other people? What are you especially good at doing? Leaders are those who deploy themselves carefully, and they only work in areas where they can employ their unique strengths to their highest levels of excellence and distinction. So question number 5 is, looking around you, what are you better at than other people? Of all the things you do, what are you better at? What are you really good at doing? Where do you make a significant contribution in your work? And where could you become better in order to make an even greater contribution to accelerate your career even faster? Now, number 6 is what we call your area of mastery. We have to ask yourself this. What is it that you can become really outstanding doing? One of the things we know is that high-performing men and women are very, very good at one or a few things, and they do more and more of those, and mastery, competence, leads to high productivity. What is a top priority with regard to the spending of your time? I'll tell you what it is. It's spending time becoming better at the things that are most important that you do. Spending time learning how to be really, really good at the critical things you do can lead to payoffs that are absolutely extraordinary. Remember, the top 1 or 2 or 3% earn 5 or 10 or 20 times the average because they're very, very good at a couple of things. So one of the ways that you set priorities, saying, what could I become really good at? Number 7 is ask, what are your high-value activities? What are your high-value activities? What are the things that you and only you do in your area of operation, your work, your responsibilities, that really contribute high payoff to your company? Your high-value activities are the answers to the question, why am I on the payroll? What have I been hired to accomplish? What are my key result areas? And here's an important point. Never give in to the temptation to do small things first. Never give in to the temptation to clear up little things when you still have valuable things to do. Number 8 is, how do you use the ABCDE system in order to dramatically increase your ability to produce? Well, the ABCDE system is taught in all time management courses and basically says this, is that your A jobs are your must jobs. There's serious negative consequences if you don't do these things. Your B tasks are your should jobs. They're important, but the negative consequences for doing them are not that serious. Your C jobs are the things that are nice to do. And we have a concept called completion by deletion. Completion by deletion means delete the things that are nice to do so you have more time to work on the A's and B's. The D tasks are the tasks that you delegate. And the E tasks are the tasks that you eliminate. Now, eliminating tasks is one of the fastest ways to increase your productivity. So you ask yourself, what are the things you can eliminate? What are the things you can delegate? What are the things you can delete? And you'll find that your A task will almost invariably be the 20% of things that will account for 80% of what you do. Number 9, and this is the key question in time management. Always ask yourself, what is the most valuable use of my time right now? What is the most valuable use of your time right now? Most important question in time management. It keeps you on track, keeps you working steadily in the direction of your highest capability to perform. Keep asking, what's the most valuable use of my time right now? Then do only that thing. This brings us to priority setting idea number 10 is do the right things rather than doing things right. As we said before, the very worst thing in the world is to do very well what need not be done at all. And if it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing right. So do the right things. How do you do the right things? You go through this process and you keep asking yourself, what are the things that I must do? What are the things that have the greatest possible consequences? What are the things that account for the 80% of the value of the things that I do? And do the right things rather than the fun things, the easy things, the convenient things. Key number 11 to setting priorities is to do first things first. And stay with those things until they're complete. Do first things first. And stay with those things until they're complete. Do first things first and second things not at all. Now, the 12th key to setting priorities is the quality of courage. The quality of courage is the indispensable quality of leadership, and it means to have the courage to put off doing the things that are of low contribution and focus your mind, your time, your attention on doing the things that make the greatest contribution. It takes a lot of courage to set priorities and to stick to it. But each time you do it, develops the quality of courage. This leads us to number 13, which requires courage, and it is the establishment of posteriorities. You see, if you're going to set priorities, you also have to set posteriorities. The basic rule is this, is you can't start doing one thing unless you stop doing something else. What you have to do is you have to discard the past. You have to say, what are the things I'm going to stop doing? The people I'm going to stop associating with, the jobs I'm going to stop working on, and you have to establish them as posteriorities that may or may not have been relevant in the past, but which are not relevant to the future. They are not important in their consequences. Number 14 in setting priorities, always choose the future over the past. Always choose the future over the past. Always choose the opportunities of tomorrow rather than the problems of yesterday. Do you know that 80% of people spend their time working on solving the problems of yesterday or finding out who's to blame for them? When everything's go wrong, always ask yourself, where do we go from here? What is the future? What do we do tomorrow, the next day? How do we solve it? Keep yourself solution-oriented, future-oriented, rather than present and past-oriented. 15th key to priorities is to focus on opportunities. Ask yourself, since you're going to have to live the rest of your life in the future, what are the opportunities of tomorrow? What are the things that you can do today that will lead to great payoffs in the future, based on everything that you know? Think always in terms of future orientation. It's the hallmark of the superior thinker. Where do we go from here? What do we do from here? Now, number 16 is to consider the futurity of all present events. The futurity of all present events. Futurity simply asks the question, what is the positive potential future impact of what I'm doing? In one of the most longitudinal studies on success, what they found was that men and women who were very successful had what they called long-time perspective. They found that cross-culturally, throughout all social, economics, and racial groups, people who had the longest time perspective were always the men and women who accomplished the most. Now, what did this mean? It meant that everything that they did on a day-to-day basis, they asked themselves, how is this likely to affect me 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years out? And the longer the time perspective, the more likely it was that those people would move up socioeconomically. They also found that people who had short time perspective, people who were only thinking about how these things would affect them today, people, if you like, were always looking for the things that were fun and easy rather than the things that were long-term and required tremendous discipline and were hard but had long payoffs. The people who concentrated on the short term were always the least successful people. The people with the long time perspective were the most successful. Remember, success, by the way, is an attitude. And the critical attitude that you need to develop to be a great success in your life is to think in terms of the long term. Practice delayed gratification. Work hard today in order to enjoy the benefits tomorrow. And one of the ways of setting priorities is saying, what is the most important use of my time right now with regard to the long term, and then do that. Number 17, remember this, there's always enough time to do the important things. We say there's never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it over. The fact is there's always enough time to do the important things. A person says, I don't have enough time, is a person who has really not thought. So ask yourself this question. What would you do with your time if you only had 6 months to live? What would you do with your time if you only had 6 months to live? You would find that your mind would become wondrously clear, as Samuel Johnson said, and it would be very clear to you what is really, really important. An exercise we put our people through in our seminars, we say, what would you do if you only had 6 weeks to live, or 6 days, or 6 hours, or 60 minutes? You see, when you begin to really look at your life, you'll find that there's always enough time to do the important things, but the critical thinking skill is to look at your work and do what Thomas J. Watson said, founder of IBM, think. Think about your work before you begin. Think about your work before you begin. Now, number 18 is to always be upgrading and downgrading your posteriorities and your priorities. You see, something which was very, very important to do today or yesterday may not be important tomorrow. So always be asking yourself, what are my priorities today? What were they yesterday? What need I do more of? What need I do less of? We have a natural tendency to do what is fun and to do what is easy. We have a natural tendency to do what is small and irrelevant because it's enjoyable. But the key to success is to be upgrading some tasks and downgrading the others. And finally, number 19, a key question. We call it the 1 month question. With regard to your work, ask yourself every single day before you begin this simple question. And the question is, if you were called away for an entire month and you had to leave tomorrow, what one thing would you get done before you left? Once you've written that down and thought about it, then ask yourself, if you had just enough time to do one more thing, what would it be? And then write down that. And if you do this, you'll be working on your top priorities